fresh out of college, strapped for cash and swimming in a sea of uncertainty. I took a bold step that felt more like a leap of faith. I moved into a shared apartment. It was one of those old, faded brick buildings clustered along the fringes of downtown Columbus, Ohio, where the rent was forgiving and the walls carried the echo of 1,000 past conversations. The apartment itself was modest, but had a charm that spoke of countless stories yet to be told. My new roommate, whom I'd never met until the day I moved in, was a guy named Jamie. He was a quiet sort, with a noticeable Spanish accent that rolled off his tongue softly, almost melodiously. Jamie wasn't much for chatter, but he had an air of easygoing amiability that made our first meeting less awkward than I'd feared. The room I rented was small but furnished, which was a huge draw at the time. A twin-sized bed was snugly fitted into one corner, with a decent-sized dresser, a closet, and a TV stand occupying the rest of the space. It was all pretty standard until I noticed the collection of stuffed animals perched atop the dresser. Among them sat a large teddy bear, its glassy eyes staring unblinkingly towards the bed, which I found peculiarly out of place. "Odd choice of decor, huh?" I remarked, hoping to break the ice a bit more with Jamie. He let out a burst of laughter, deep and hearty, that seemed to fill the small living space. "Yeah, my room's got a bunch too. Just leave them be. The landlord likes them there," he advised with a wink, as if sharing in an inside joke I had yet to understand. That first evening, I busied myself with unpacking. My life packed away in boxes felt strangely minimized, each item a reminder of a chapter that was closing. As night fell, I settled into bed to watch some TV, trying to drown out the feel of newness in the enveloping darkness of an unfamiliar room. It was then, amidst the low hum of the late show, that I heard it, a faint, electronic chirp, brief but distinct. I shrugged it off as nothing more than a quirk of the old building, the kind of thing you grow accustomed to with time. The next day passed without a sign of Jamie. I assumed he was at work, though we hadn't delved into the details of our daily lives just yet. By the time evening rolled back around, bringing with it the cool, dusky shadows that crept along the aging walls, I was more settled, lounging in my pajamas and flicking through channels. That's when I heard it again. That peculiar electronic sound, this time clearer without the backdrop of my earlier distractions. It was odd, sure, but hardly seemed like a big deal. I brushed it aside, my mind more on the plot twists of my current read, a thriller that had me hooked from the first page. As my eyelids grew heavy with sleep, the mystery of the sound faded into the background. The following day, I returned from my job at a nearby cafe, the scent of coffee clinging to my clothes like a stubborn shadow. Jamie was there, a rare occurrence in our brief stint as roommates. He greeted me with a casual nod and an unexpected question. "What book you into?" I paused, thrown off by his sudden interest. "It's just a thriller, something to keep the evenings interesting," I replied, trying to gauge where his inquiry was coming from. "I saw it in your room," Jamie said nonchalantly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A chill trickled down my spine. "How did you see it?" I asked, my voice tight with a mix of curiosity and alarm. "Oh, I needed to grab something I'd left behind," he explained with an ease that didn't quite reach his eyes. That night, as I reached under my bed to retrieve the book, a nagging thought stopped me cold. How could Jamie have seen my book if it had been hidden away unless? My gaze slowly drifted to the teddy bear on the dresser, its gaze eerily fixed in my direction, and a shiver of realization crept over me. With hesitant steps, I approached the dresser, my heart pounding louder with each move. Reaching out with trembling hands, I grabbed the teddy bear and peered into its eyes. And there it was, a tiny camera lens, perfectly hidden within the right eye socket. A cold dread washed over me as the pieces clicked together in a horrifying clarity. I threw the bear across the room as if it were a flame and stormed towards Jamie's room. His door, of course, was locked, a barrier he had, but I did not. I pounded on the wood, my calls for him to open up drowned out by the pulsing silence that answered back. Lights off, door locked. He was making it clear he wasn't going to face me. Without a second thought, I grabbed my essentials, dialed the landlord with shaky hands, and explained in hurried, frantic tones why I was breaking the lease. My voice broke as I packed my car under the cover of night, the rear-view mirror reflecting the eerie glow of the apartment I was all too eager to leave behind. As my car rolled away from that eerie apartment, the streetlights flickered overhead like a solemn goodbye from a movie scene. The night swallowed up the rear of my car as I drove, my heart still hammering in my chest from the adrenaline and the raw fear of what I had just escaped. The realization that my privacy had been so grossly violated was a pill too bitter to swallow, and as I navigated the dark streets, my thoughts were turbulent with anger and disbelief. The drive to my friend Mark's house was a blur. Mark had always been my go-to in times of trouble, and tonight was no exception. As I explained the situation to him, his face morphed through a spectrum of shock, anger, and concern. He offered me his couch without hesitation, a temporary safe harbor from the storm I'd fled. Lying in the quiet of Mark's living room, the eerie feeling of being watched still clawed at me. The image of the teddy bear's glassy eye, the hidden camera lens staring out at me, haunted the edges of my sleep. It wasn't just the violation of my privacy. It was the shattering of my trust and a chilling reminder of how vulnerable I was. The next morning, Mark sat with me at his kitchen table, a pot of strong coffee between us. "You need to report this, man," he insisted, pushing a mug towards me. "Who knows how many others he's done this to?" He was right. My resolve hardened with the caffeine coursing through my veins, and I contacted the local police. Explaining the situation to the officer felt surreal, like recounting a plot from one of the thrillers I love to read. Only this time, the horror was real, and it was mine. The investigation that followed was both swift and unsettling. The police discovered that Jamie, or as they identified him, James Castillo, had been renting that apartment under a false name. More disturbingly, they found similar setups in his room, cameras hidden in seemingly innocuous objects, all feeding footage to a small, sophisticated setup in his closet. It wasn't just voyeurism. It was a breach on a level that made my skin crawl. The landlord was questioned too. Overwhelmed and defensive, he claimed ignorance about James' activities but admitted to not doing thorough background checks on his tenants. It was a lapse that cost more than just rent money. It cost peace of mind and safety. As the days turned into weeks, I stayed with Mark, slowly rebuilding my sense of security. The police kept me updated. James was charged with several counts of privacy invasion and unlawful surveillance. The legal proceedings were a cold comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. I began to look for a new place, this time with far more caution and far less trust. The experience had left a deep imprint on me, changing the way I viewed privacy and the sanctity of personal space. I installed security cameras in my new apartment, a bitter irony not lost on me. But they were my cameras, my eyes, ensuring that my home was a fortress against the unseen threats that lurked in the shadows. Months later, as life found a new rhythm, the phobia that had taken root that night began to ease. Yet, every time I saw a teddy bear, a chill would run down my spine, and I'd instinctively turn it around so it couldn't see me. That fear, irrational yet visceral, was a scar from that night. A night when my home was no longer a sanctuary, but a stage for a stranger's dark entertainment. In the end, the ordeal taught me a harsh but vital lesson about vigilance and vulnerability in the modern world. Trust had to be earned, and privacy, once taken for granted, had become my most cherished and fiercely guarded treasure. As I settled into my new life, the shadows of the past receded, leaving behind not just the memory of a violation, but the determination to never let my guard down again. Two years ago, my life took a turn down a road I never expected, and it all began with a change in my professional landscape. I had been working at a bustling office building in downtown Silverwood, where the days were long but generally good, largely because of my friendly coworkers. The opportunity for a better position arose, and not one to let chances slip by, I seized it. The new job was everything I hoped it would be: challenging, engaging, and even more aligned with my career goals. However, just as I was settling into this new chapter, a text from the past pulled me back. It was from Jeremy, a former coworker. He had been just another face in the office, one I hadn't thought much about since leaving. He was the kind of person you'd politely nod to but never really engage in deep conversation, partly because he had a vibe that was, frankly, a bit off. There had always been whispers about him. Whispers about the odd things he'd say or the awkward way he'd linger a little too long by your desk. So, when his name flashed on my phone, it was unexpected. The text was simple, a casual invitation to hang out, but it struck me as odd. Why would Jeremy, who I barely spoke to, reach out like this? I hesitated, not responding immediately as I mulled over how to politely decline. Before I could, another message popped up, this one tinged with impatience and a hint of accusation. He was upset I hadn't replied quickly enough. With a sigh, I typed out a response, explaining that I was really busy with my new job and didn't have time to meet. His reply was delayed, and when it finally came, it was terse and cold. I pushed the exchange from my mind, absorbed once again by the demands of my new role. Days turned into nights, work into leisure, until one evening, my phone rang. It was Jeremy, calling unexpectedly. I let it go to voicemail, not in the mood to revisit whatever awkwardness had passed between us. His message, however, left me cold. In a calm, almost eerie tone, he insinuated he knew my schedule, claiming I wasn't at work the previous day, which was true. I had enjoyed a rare day off, lounging at home in solitude. But how did he know? The implication that he had been watching me was unmistakable. I texted him, my fingers trembling slightly as I asked how he knew about my activities. The typing bubble appeared, lingered, then disappeared. No response came. That night, as darkness settled over Silverwood, my nerves were on edge. I found myself peering out the windows, scanning the street for any sign of Jeremy or anyone else that didn't belong. A car parked at the far end of the road caught my attention. It was positioned just so, offering a clear view of my front door. It sat there for hours, an ominous sentinel in the waning light. Nothing else happened that night, but the seed of unease was planted. The following night, my phone lit up again at 1 a.m. A call from Jeremy. I was asleep and missed it, but the fact that he had tried to reach out at such an hour only heightened my anxiety. He left no message this time, only silence and the growing realization that his behavior was spiraling. I texted him the next morning, my message a blend of confusion and frustration. Why was he calling at such hours? Why was he acting this way? Again, there was no reply, and at that moment, I decided to block his number. It was a decision I should have made sooner, perhaps, but part of me had still hoped for some reasonable explanation. For a brief period, everything seemed to calm down. Work consumed my days, and I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Jeremy had moved on. But that fragile peace shattered one evening as I returned home from a particularly taxing day at the office. As I was about to turn in for the night, a sharp knock echoed through the quiet house. My heart sank as I peered through the peephole and saw Jeremy standing there. Despite every instinct screaming at me to do otherwise, I opened the door, foolishly thinking I could resolve this once and for all. The moment the door swung open, Jeremy's demeanor changed. He lunged at me, his hands reaching out. Panic surged through me, and instinct took over. I managed to slip from his grasp and bolted outside, my only thought to put as much distance between us as possible. I sprinted across my yard, darted into the street, and didn't stop until I reached my neighbor's house across the way. I turned just in time to see Jeremy stop at the edge of the street, look around wildly, and then sprint towards a car parked at the corner. He jumped in and drove off, leaving me trembling and alone under the stark street lights. I hurried back inside and called the police, my voice shaking as I recounted everything. They arrived quickly, taking my statement and promising to handle the situation. That night marked the beginning of a long process that would eventually lead to a restraining order against Jeremy. It was a small piece of paper, but it represented a hard-won piece. Yet, as I would soon discover, the story was far from over. The days following the incident with Jeremy were filled with a heightened sense of vigilance. The restraining order was a relief, certainly, but the shadows of what had occurred lingered, casting a pall over my daily life. I found myself jumping at the slightest noise, eyeing every car that passed by with suspicion. My home, once a sanctuary, had become a fortress. In the weeks that followed, I worked on reclaiming my sense of security. I installed better locks, added a security camera, and even started attending self-defense classes. It was empowering, slowly stitching back the sense of control that Jeremy had tried to tear away from me. Yet, despite these measures, there was an undercurrent of fear that I couldn't completely shake. One afternoon, I was returning from a particularly grueling session at the self-defense studio when I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. There was a car parked across the street from my house, nondescript but somehow familiar. I couldn't be sure, but it seemed like the same one Jeremy had used that night he fled. My breath caught in my throat as I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I peered out through the blinds, my hands trembling slightly. The car sat there, innocuous to any passerby, but to me, it was a harbinger of potential danger. After several tense minutes, the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. It wasn't Jeremy. This person was smaller, with a different gait, but the very fact that they were associated with that vehicle was enough to send a wave of panic through me. I didn't hesitate. I called the police, my voice steady but urgent. They arrived quickly, for which I was immensely grateful. The officers approached the car, speaking briefly with the person before escorting them back to their vehicle and watching as they drove away. One of the officers came to my door afterwards to explain. It was a private investigator, he told me, noting my bewildered expression. Hired by Jeremy, it seems, though he won't be bothering you anymore. We've made it very clear that any contact, indirect or otherwise, is a violation of the restraining order. The revelation that Jeremy had gone to such lengths, hiring someone to watch me, was chilling. It underscored the depths of his obsession and made me painfully aware of how vulnerable I had been. The following months were a slow crawl back towards normalcy. I was cautious, always aware. But gradually the acute phases of fear began to recede. Life resumed its regular rhythm. Work was busy, and new friendships bloomed. Distractions that helped mend the frayed edges of my past experiences. It was nearly a year later when I finally felt the weight of the ordeal lift. I had just come home from a day filled with the usual bustle of work when I found a letter from the Silverwood Police Department in my mailbox. The contents were brief but profound. Jeremy had been arrested for violating another restraining order filed by someone else, and this time, the consequences were severe enough to ensure he would be kept away from the public for a long time. The news brought a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a deep, resonant anger for all that I had been forced to endure, and sadness for whoever else had suffered at his hands. Yet, there was also a burgeoning sense of closure. With Jeremy securely behind bars, I could finally feel the last vestiges of fear dissolve. Life moves on, as it must. I've grown stronger, more vigilant, and perhaps a bit wiser to the darker undercurrents of human nature. But I've also grown more appreciative of the simple moments of peace, the laughter of friends, and the quiet evenings spent in the comfort of a home that feels safe once again. As I reflect on everything that happened, I realize that while some scars may remain, they don't define me. Instead, they are stark reminders of my resilience, of my capacity to face adversity and emerge, not unscathed, but undeterred. And in that resilience, I find a profound sense of triumph, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. About a month ago, an unnerving experience shattered the mundane tranquility of my daily life. I live alone in a small house nestled within a bustling neighborhood of Arlington, a city where anonymity is an unspoken promise amidst the crowd. Having moved here a year ago, I had settled into a comfortable routine, working a typical office job with regular hours. I've been saving up, eyeing a bigger place in a quieter part of town as a potential upgrade to my current living situation. One ordinary evening, as I returned home from work, I collected my mail, a daily ritual that unexpectedly turned alarming. Among the usual bills and flyers, I found an envelope with no return address and conspicuously absent of postage. Its presence was curious, its origins a mystery. Intrigued and a bit cautious, I decided to open it first. Inside, I discovered a series of photographs. They were printed on plain paper, the quality grainy and amateurish, as if hastily produced on a home printer. There were 5 photos in total, and chillingly, each one featured me. One captured me walking along the sidewalk, a path I took daily from the parking lot a few blocks from my office to my workplace amidst the city's hustle. The others showed various scenes of my daily routine. Exiting my car in the parking lot, waiting at a stoplight during my commute. The realization that I was being watched, documented in my most mundane moments, sent a shiver down my spine. No words or messages accompanied these images, just the stark, silent testimony of surveillance. I felt a wave of vulnerability wash over me. Someone was observing me from a distance, invading my privacy with every zoomed lens. My mind raced as I tried to recall any unusual encounters or lingering strangers over the past days, but nothing stood out. The city's anonymous throng offered too many hiding places. Who could be watching, and why? The questions spiraled, each more unsettling than the last. Compelled by a mix of fear and the urgent need for answers, I went to the police station that same evening. I relayed my story to a sympathetic officer who listened intently but ultimately informed me of the limitations of what could be done. Since no direct threat was made and the photographs were taken in public spaces, The incident skirted the fringes of legality. The advice was straightforward but frustrating. Stay vigilant, report any further incidents, and try to note any potential observers during my daily routines. For the next few days, I became acutely aware of my surroundings. Every face in the crowd was a potential watcher. Every unremarkable car parked along my route, a possible stakeout. I scrutinized windows, alleys, and passers-by with a paranoia I'd never known. Despite my vigilance, no new clues emerged and no more photographs arrived. This small mercy, however, was short-lived. About a week after the initial envelope, another one appeared in my mailbox. This batch was even more disturbing, not because of their content alone, but because these were taken at my house. The new photos chronicled me arriving home from work, stepping out of my car, walking to my front door. Intimate moments of my presumed safe haven now exposed. The boundary of my personal space had been unequivocally breached. This revelation intensified my fear. Whoever was doing this knew not only my routines, but also where I lived. I reported this second incident to the police, but again, their hands were tied without specific threats or further evidence. Since then, no more mysterious envelopes have appeared. It's been a quiet month, but the silence is as disquieting as the photographs themselves. I've since changed my parking routine and am diligently searching for a new place to live, hopeful that perhaps these changes disrupted the watchers' plans or scared them off. Yet, I'm left with haunting questions. Who has been watching me? And will they resurface? Every day, as I continue with my life, these questions linger, coloring my thoughts and actions with an anxiety I can't quite shake. The fear of the unknown, the potential return of the watcher, leaves me looking over my shoulder, wondering if the eyes of a stranger are once again documenting my every move. As the weeks stretched into a month since the last unsettling envelope, life in Arlington gradually resumed its rhythm. Despite the apparent normalcy, the lingering unease remained a shadow that followed me every day. I became more cautious, altering my routines and constantly surveying my surroundings with a heightened sense of awareness. My once straightforward commute now involved a meticulous scan of every nearby face and vehicle, a ritual born out of necessity rather than paranoia. I continued to search for a new place to live, driven by a desperate need for a fresh start and perhaps a deeper sense of security. Each viewing, each potential new neighborhood became a meticulous evaluation of safety and anonymity. My criteria had expanded beyond square footage and rent affordability to include secure parking, controlled access, and minimal foot traffic. Meanwhile, at work, I found solace in the predictable tasks and familiar faces of colleagues who remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding in my personal life. I kept the incident mostly to myself, fearing unnecessary alarm or the burden of explanation. However, the solitude of keeping such a secret only deepened the isolation I felt. About 6 weeks after the last disturbing mail, my efforts to move seemed to be coming to fruition. I had found a promising apartment in a quieter part of town, with secured entry and private parking. A stark contrast to my current living situation. The relief of moving forward was palpable, but so was the anxiety of any potential follow-up from my unknown observer. It was then that I decided to take additional precautions. I installed a small security camera above my current home's front door, a digital eye to watch over the comings and goings in my absence. It was a small measure of control, but it provided a slight ease to my restless thoughts. As I prepared for the move, packing boxes became both a physical and metaphorical act of closing chapters. Each item I packed was a step away from the vulnerability I had experienced, a move towards reclaiming my privacy and peace of mind. Then, One ordinary Tuesday, as I returned from another day at the office, my heart sank. There, nestled among the usual junk mail and bills, was another envelope, plain, unmarked, and ominously familiar. My hands trembled as I hesitated at the mailbox, the fear resurfacing with a vengeance. With a deep breath, I grasped the envelope and hurried inside, bracing myself for what I might find. Inside were more photographs. However, this time, they were different. These images were not just of me, but also included several shots of my house taken from various angles. The photographs were clearer, more focused than before. It was as if the watcher wanted me to know they could get closer, that my efforts to evade them had been in vain. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the implications. The watcher was not just a distant observer anymore. They had approached my sanctuary, marking it, and by extension, me, as their continued focus. This was no longer about random photographs. It was a deliberate, escalating invasion of my privacy. I called the police again, this time with a mix of anger and desperation in my voice. The responding officer was sympathetic but reiterated the frustrating truth. Without a direct threat or evidence of physical trespassing, their ability to act was severely limited. They took copies of the new photos, promised increased patrols in the area, and advised me to continue documenting everything. That night, I barely slept, the every creak and sigh of the house setting me on edge. By morning, my resolve had hardened. I could not, and would not, live in fear any longer. I accelerated my moving plans, pushing to relocate within the week, desperate to leave behind the place that had become a stage for this twisted surveillance. As I write this, the move is complete. My new apartment feels like a fortress compared to my old home. The security measures, the anonymity of a larger complex, and the absence of any further envelopes have slowly started to mend the frayed edges of my nerves. Yet, despite the physical relocation, the psychological impact lingers. I find myself wary of strangers, more guarded in my interactions, and incessantly mindful of my surroundings. The experience has reshaped my perspective on privacy and safety in ways I had never anticipated. As for the watcher, their identity remains a mystery, their motivations obscured and their presence a ghostly imprint on my past. Whether they have moved on or simply paused, the uncertainty remains a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. Yet, I am determined not to let this unknown assailant define my life. I've begun taking steps to heal, to rebuild the confidence that was shaken by this ordeal. Therapy sessions, enhanced security measures, and the support of friends and family have all been part of this process. As I adjust to my new environment, I hold on to the hope that with each passing day, the fear will recede, leaving behind only the strength that comes from having survived and overcome.